Everyone, I'd like to call to order this special meeting of the full Board of Regents at the University of Alaska. It's Tuesday, July 30th, 2019, about 5 minutes after 9. It is on. I'm sorry. Is that better? Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. So this is a special meeting of the Board of Regents. Micah seems to be cutting in and out. Okay. Again, about 5 minutes after 9, we're in the Gorsuch Commons at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. I'd like to have Randy give a roll call for the board, please.
Regent Anderson? Regent Banya? Regent Beretta? Here. Regent Davies?
Here.
Regent Hargraves?
Here.
Regent Hughes?
Here.
Regent O'Neill?
Here.
Regent Parker?
Here.
Regent Perdue?
Here.
Regent Garrett?
Here.
Regent Tuber? And who just joined us online?
Dale Anderson.
You have a quorum.
All right, thank you very much. And next I'd like safety minute with Megan Blado.
Welcome again to the Gorsuch Commons building. In the event of an emergency where we need to evacuate the building, please exit out the doors to my right, walk along the back of the building, and cross the bridge to the visitor parking lot and wait there for further instructions. If there's an emergency where we need to stay here, please stay here and wait further instructions. And please remember to be mindful as you're walking outside of your areas around you, and stay off your cell phones while you're crossing streets and parking lots and things like that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Before we move to the adoption of the agenda, I would like to recognize that we have Senator Stevens and Senator Tom Begich in the audience here. And if you gentlemen would like to come forward and give us a quick address, I would appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. And as I look around the Board of Regents, I realize I have many long-term friends, long-time friends. I thank you for your service. And John and you and I served in the House of Representatives for a few years. So it's now it's dark. So it shows that the president hasn't paid the electric bill, apparently. So there we are.
That shows you how dire our
Yes. So, I'll just take a minute and say I appreciate the challenges you are facing. I know you will do your best. You asked me what my advice is. The advice is simply follow the Constitution, but you know that. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your support. Senator Begich.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Chairman and Mr. President, Board and the Board of Regents. As Senator Stevens just said, you have a constitutional obligation. It's very unique. The University of Alaska has its own section 2 of Article 7, but the Board of Regents has its own section as well. It is not the role of government to intervene in the active decisions that are made at the university level. That is the role of the Board of Regents and the President and President advisors. So I hope that you will keep that constitutional mandate in mind as you go through your deliberations today. And remember, you are profoundly important to the future of the state of Alaska. The choices you make matter to all of us. We in the legislature are supporting those choices with our votes yesterday. We will continue to do so. Please craft the university that I'm proud to be an alum of. Please craft the university we can all be proud of. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. Okay, with that, I would like to announce one small change in the agenda. I'm at the out, as soon as we begin, after we adopt the agenda and we begin our budget discussion, I would like to invite Alex Jorgensen and Maria Williams as representative of the students and the faculty alliances to make a short 5-minute presentation, and then we'll proceed with the agenda as described in our written materials. So with that, can I get a motion to adopt the agenda? Moved and seconded. Brandy, could you call the roll, please?
Regent Banya? Yes. Regent Tuber, Regent Hughes,
Yes.
Regent Garrett, Regent O'Neill, Regent Hargraves, Regent Beretta,
Yes.
Regent Purdue,
Yes.
Regent Anderson, Regent Anderson, Regent Parker, Regent Davies,
Yes.
10 in favor, none opposed.
Okay, thank you. So, do I see Alex coming up? Perfect. Good timing. So, Alex, if you would take 5 minutes or less to give us a statement representing the students.
Hello. So I don't thank you all for letting me speak here today. It's a great honor, and I'm not speaking on behalf of it as an individual, but it's simply as the kind of leadership for all student governance across the university system. So I think I can speak for all of us as student leaders that we don't envy the decision making that lies before you all. We're on a very tough road, and there's no easy solution. There's no really pain-free path forward. And I think that we as students really understand that. That the university that I started here 4 years ago is going to look very different than the university a year and a half from now. And I don't know the right answer. I don't know the best path forward. That's not my job. But what I do know is that including students in the decision-making process will lead to the best outcome possible. We represent 26,000 students across the university system, and that's a lot of collective knowledge of the student experience, right? And at the end of the day, every decision you guys make as the Board of Regents is centered around the student experience, right? It's how do we improve the student experience? How do we improve student outcomes? And as students, we happen to have quite a bit of knowledge in what it's like to be a student at this university. So what we ask you here today is to include us in this decision-making process, because right now we've received a lot of negative messaging from the state. We've been told that our future is simply not important, or that our education is simply a tool of political bargaining. So I think really the last thing that university students need right now is to feel jaded coming out of this system, because right now we're going through the process of restructuring the university that we all love. I've been here for 4 years, and there's many students that have been here for longer. We want to feel heard. I think we as students deserve that. So again, we don't know the best path forward. That's not our job here, but we just ask that whenever you're making a decision about the future of this university, that you think to yourself, what is the student perspective? How can I include students in this process? How can I get the student perspective I need to feel informed? Because we have student leaders across this campus that are willing to get involved. We're here. But we can't get involved. We can't help if we're not at the table. So I would just ask that you please include students in this process, because that's really what's going to lead to the best path forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I just want to note that, as representing in your position, we have invited you to be at the table here. And so to the regents, as we go through our conversation today, if you have questions that you want to address to Alex, please, it's in order to do that. In fact, it's kind of expected. So thank you very much. And the same thing applies to our representative from the Faculty Alliance, Maria Williams. And if you could give your comments, we'd appreciate it.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Alex, for your profound words, because we are here as a university, and our primary goal is to educate students. So first of all, thank you, Chair Davies, and thank you, Board of Regents, for allowing me to read a brief statement. These are extraordinary times. I want to thank each and every one of you for your advocacy in the area of higher education and the additional hundreds of hours you are each spending on UA communiques, reports, and countless emails. I wish to thank Chancellor Sandine, Chancellor Caulfield, and Chancellor White and their respective faculty senate presidents, senior faculty, senior administrators, and staff on coming together in a true shared governance fashion to discuss, share, and analyze the future of the UA system and our 3 separately accredited universities. Alaska is my home state, Anchorage is my hometown where I was born and raised. The university system is vital to the future of the state. All the faculty, staff, and students are dedicated to guiding us to a better and more sustainable future, and it is a testament to the strength of the relationship between the 3 chancellors, the 3 faculty senate presidents, as they have been working together to discuss the models and options that President Johnson has proposed. I urge you to listen to the Chancellor's reports, as they have truly been engaged with the faculty, staff, on developing a consortium model that would maintain the separate accreditations and still improve efficiencies in operations and budgeting. The chancellors are a direct link between their campuses and community stakeholders and are uniquely positioned to collaboratively address their budgets with a balanced reduction in instruction and administration. They are already using their intimate knowledge of the universities to make cuts and are working collaboratively to find program consolidations that are market-driven and result in cost savings while minimizing impact on student enrollment. As the Chair of Faculty Alliance, my greatest focus is on maintaining the accreditation that each of our universities has worked so hard for. UAA and UAS have recently been reaffirmed in their accreditation with the NWCCU. This is an effort that takes up to 2 years and involves a lot of heavy lifting on behalf of the faculty and the 3 provosts. It is laudable that UAA and UAS have received excellent commentary and commendations, which reflects the unique personalities and strengths of these 2 universities. UAF is preparing for a fall site visit from the NWCCU, and I expect UAF to receive accolades for their work in curriculum, research, and student success as well. Having 3 separately accredited universities is a reflection of the diversity of our state and is a sign of strength. The 3 universities are now examining ways in which they can act as a consortium, maintaining their separate accreditations, but aligning and sharing aspects of the university that will make it even more efficient and also result in student success. Student success will always be the #1 lens in which faculty examine proposed changes, and is certainly on my radar as the UA system moves towards establishing a new model or restructure. Faculty are the guardians of the curriculum, and we deeply appreciate that Chancellor Sandine, Chancellor Caulfield, and Chancellor White have engaged our voices. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Before I pass the gavel to, or sort of the floor to President Johnson, I want to make 2 quick announcements. One is that if you haven't heard, the task force on restructuring, the board task force that I appointed, had 1 meeting on July 12th, and I have since that time asked them to be on hold. So there will be no future meetings unless we schedule another meeting for the task force. They are preparing an interim report, and that should be out to the board here in a few days. It's in final draft form right now, so we should have that soon. And the second announcement I want to make is that as we move forward with whatever we move forward with, I think it's going to be advisable to have a special committee of the board on restructuring. And so I've asked 3 members of our board to serve on this special committee, and I've asked Regent Hughes to chair this subcommittee, and I've asked Regents Perdue and Banya to serve on the committee. This will serve as a sounding board, kind of an interim way for the president to get interaction with board members, some board members. And when and if the chair decides to call a meeting of the subcommittee, it'll be a public meeting, it'll be announced, and of course, all members of the board are welcome to participate in those meetings. So I just want you to know that I have appointed that subcommittee, and it will be moving forward along with whatever restructuring plan we adopt. So with that, President Johnson. Oh, go ahead.
With due respect to President Johnson, I wondered, since there has been quite a bit of question around the issue of the Regent's authority, and as we move into these discussions, that's a key issue for us. I wonder if we could ask our General Counsel to give us just a few words on of guidance on that issue.
Yes, please. General Counsel Hustina.
Thank you, Regent Perdue and Chair Davies. So in brief, the Constitution explicitly requires that the Board of Regents manage the university. The Constitution also establishes the university as a separate constitutional corporation. Minutes from the Constitutional Convention show that UA was intentionally excluded from the executive branch of government by the framers of the Constitution to insulate it from politics. The governor may veto university appropriations in accordance with the Constitution. However, it exceeds the governor's authority and politicizes UA's budget to pressure regions to allocate an appropriation in his preferred manner. Both by constitutional mandate and by law, the board determines expenditures subject to appropriation and the policies, programs, and functions of the university. Finally, while the governor's proposal eliminates funding for research, many research functions are actually authorized or mandated by law. I'll give you a couple examples: the Earthquake and Volcanic Assessment Project and a state seismologist, Institute of Marine Science, Unmanned Aircraft Training Program, the State Climate Center and a state climatologist, the Institute for Circumpolar Health Studies, the Center for Information Technology, Cooperative Extension, the Mineral Industry Research Program, the Alaska Native Language Center, and the Fisheries Industrial Technology Center, now known as the Kodiak Seafood and Marine Science Center. So those are some of those programs that are mandated that would be subject to defunding. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Are there any questions from council? No, thank you very much. Appreciate that. President Johnson.
Thank you very much, Chair Davies. As I look out across the room today and across the state via video to other locations, here I see leadership, legislative leadership, media leadership, community leadership, and university leadership, distinguished faculty, dedicated staff, and superb students who are committed to their educational pursuits. You know, leadership is not really needed when we have lots of resources, when we are secure, when we have a clear and well-established way to resolve conflict. During those stable times, our policies and our regulations and our processes and our rules, our delegations of authority, our cultural mores, all take care of those resource, security, and conflict resolution issues. But when things are disrupted, when resources are taken, when autonomy is threatened, and when internal conflicts go unresolved, that's when leadership is most needed. And that's where we are in our university today. Our resources are being cut way back, 5 out of the last 6 years, 49% of our state funds. Our autonomy is being threatened by prescriptive budget directions, and conflict within the university, indeed across our entire state, is at a fever pitch. In times like these, we seek authoritative leaders who have simple solutions to those complex challenges. After all, they are our leaders. We authorize them to lead, and that's what they need to do. But facing the challenges we face, including a truly existential state funding cut, requires leadership that is willing to admit that it does not have all the answers. Leadership that is willing to question how we're organized in order to preserve what's best and most precious about the University of Alaska, while we leave behind what we must in the face of challenges to our budget, painful though that is to all those programs and faculty and staff and students left behind. And that's so that we can innovate and thrive in this new climate of constrained resources. This board has a great record of leadership, of innovating in pursuit of our interests to serve the higher education needs of Alaska. The Strategic Pathways process helped us become a leaner university as we sought to strengthen our service to Alaskans with less money. And even more important, like all planning processes, we learned a lot about the university in all 22 areas we focused on. And we learned that together with 230 faculty and staff and students and community leaders through over 150 worksite meetings. Our strategic goals set for 2025 helped us prioritize our investments and gave us focus on what's most important for our state: economic development and workforce development, research, educational attainment, and, importantly, cost effectiveness. These goals are less about the university and more about what our state needs. Another example is our vision for 2040, which lays out a research-based, ambitious, and truly innovative vision for what UA can be for Alaskans, if not the nation and the world, if we just ask and answer A few very simple questions. What if? And why not? And that vision puts our people and our students, our faculty, our staff, alumni, employers, business partners, the state as a whole at the core of what we do. There are no multiple competing silos or bureaucracies in that vision. Instead, it's an open network of courses and programs and initiatives that invite Alaskans to build their future, their Alaska, with us at the university. Our focus is on the student experience. That focus is represented by investments. Even though our budgets have been cut, we have reallocated and made investments in student advising, in scholarships, in online programs, and new systems that expand access to Alaskans no matter where they are. And that reflects your leadership, your interest in growing and thriving university, because we know that's what's required for a growing and thriving state. While we've made progress on that front and on many others, there's much more to do. But in this fiscal climate, how will we adapt so that we have the resources and the autonomy and the means to resolve conflict, those necessary tasks of leadership? We need to rethink how we organize ourselves, and it is that issue that we come together today to discuss, and I hope decide. Make no mistake, the University of Alaska faces an unprecedented fiscal crisis, unprecedented in its magnitude and in its speed. While heroic efforts on the university's behalf have been made by our supporters, students, Alex, you and the students have done a terrific job, Maria, faculty, all across the system. And that support comes from a clear majority of our legislature. And I want to thank you, senators, for being here today and for your strong words and actions in support of higher education in Alaska. And we thank you. What we also know today are a few points. That our current budget is 41% down from last year, with predictable negative effects on our students. Our legislature has passed another budget, adding back much needed resources, and that budget hopefully will not be vetoed again by the governor. The governor recently made a proposal to reduce our budget by $85 million this year and $35 million next year through a prescriptive set of targeted cuts to core elements of our mission. We know that delay in implementing reductions only compounds the effect of the needed reductions. The board has approved, recognizing that reality, a declaration of financial exigency, giving us the tools to make reductions sooner. We need guidance from the board now as to the strategic direction you want us to follow for making those reductions. There are two basic options for the board's consideration. Reducing in our current organizational structure of 3 separately accredited universities and a statewide office handling governance and administrative services for the universities, where campus identity and autonomy are preserved. Or simplifying the structure, both in administration and in academics, into a single accredited institution with multiple locations and common student access across the state. The board's assessment of the nature and the depth of this crisis determines the appropriate response. To use an analogy, this board needs to decide whether its house is on fire or whether it's just toast burning. If the latter, the board has the luxury of engaging in a deliberate and consultative process. However, if the house is on fire, I believe the board's leadership role requires it to act swiftly and leave behind anything that is not essential to serving our students and our mission. The governor's intent to dramatically decrease state support for the university is clear. Whether the reduction is $136 million or $85 million over 1 or 2 years, the severity of the cuts and any delay in response threatens the university's ability to operate through the end of the current fiscal year. You'll hear later today from OMB that we can substitute tuition and grant and contract revenue for the state funds that have been cut. That assumes those monies are somehow available in an account from which we can draw. Those revenues must be earned in year by having programs and services and faculty and staff and researchers available, and by maintaining the confidence of our students and our funders. Both these prerequisites are severely challenged in this environment. So in my view, our house is on fire. It's also my view that determining what is essential, while extremely difficult, is much simpler in a one university context. Returning to the house analogy, if you need to remodel, you first need to know how many rooms you can afford. While that is my view, the board must first reach some decision on that issue, since it drives both the process and the options that are feasible. Second, it's a fact that UA's current structure, or any structure involving separately accredited universities, lends itself to duplicative administration and competition. Each separately accredited university literally requires separate administration, largely under a chancellor's control. Thus, any solution involving separate accreditations will necessarily require that scarce resources be applied to duplicative and expensive senior administration. While there have been recent efforts at collaboration, thank you, Maria, for your comments with respect to that. Historically, such efforts have been fleeting and the results, unfortunately, limited. We have 30 years of data that indicate that with 3 universities, competition, not the healthy kind that we see on a basketball floor or in a hockey rink, not collaboration, is the result. There are some exceptions to this fact. I have seen our students and our faculty and lots of our staff work well together across the university system. And I believe these efforts will only expand if we come together stronger than if we are apart. I will admit that my view has changed over the years. Back in 2005, when I wrote UA 2009, the strategic plan for the system at the time, I supported 3 separate and different universities, each growing and excelling in its own lane. And in strategic pathways, again, I supported that concept. But as I said a moment ago, despite the logic of that model, our actual record does not support a case that we will step up cost-effective collaboration over the long term. Nor will we create the needed capacity to quickly adapt our university to the new fiscal, demographic, and technological environment we face. Some will argue that scarce resources force collaboration. That's rarely been the case in human experience, particularly when the parties are not equally matched. When one university believes it has the upper hand, or when a university's survival is threatened by significant cuts, the competition for resources intensifies. That has already been demonstrated clearly in this crisis. Even if the competition is not condoned or fostered by leadership, and even if it harms our efforts to gain additional resources, our own employees and their community surrogates pursue these separate, and if I may, separatist agendas. So I'd like to spend the bulk of our time today first identifying from the board's perspective the critical issues that must be addressed, and second, the extent to which the 2 options we put before you or another addresses those high priority interests of the board. My hope is this approach will help the board discharge its fiduciary and leadership duty, affirmed in the Declaration of Financial Exigency last week, to the university and to its responsibilities to the citizens of this state, communities, and students, to act promptly in their best interests without regard to political or geographic or other personal considerations, and to make the difficult decisions required to reduce disruption to our students, to support our faculty and staff, to serve the state, and to ensure that the vocational, technical, and academic standards are maintained and essential services are provided. The staff, and especially the chancellors, are here today to support your discussion, and I encourage and support their participation. As I prepared my thoughts for the meeting today, I recalled a big banner that hung on the wall at shareholder meetings of Doyon Limited, where I had the honor of working some years back. And that banner had just 4 words on it, words that Alaska Native leader Morris Thompson thought were really important to remind people of at sometimes controversial shareholder meetings. And I would commend those 4 words to us today as we lead this great university in uncharted territory by grappling with critically important issues, tough issues, as Alex said, without easy answers. The first word is calm. The second is cool. The third is strength. And the fourth is integrity. So, Mr. Chairman, those are my opening remarks. And what I'd like to do now is go to slide 35 of our presentation for those of you online. Ken's got it. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Ken. It's 36 because we added a new slide. As I reflected back on those planning processes we've gone through, pathways and our goals 2025, the vision, and the many, many discussions that we have had as a board over the last several years, we boiled down what we thought the key interests were to these 4. So increasing the share of our budget that's spent on academics and student services, maximizing access to our programs for students across the state, reducing administrative costs, and providing a seamless student experience. What I think would be very helpful prior to getting into discussing the specific options is for the board to discuss these interests and also surface other interests that you believe are critically important for the evaluation of the options. These interests are critical criteria for us as a group to think about and to try to maximize as we think about and decide, hopefully today, on which strategic approach the university should take for the purpose of reducing budget and improving service. So I'd like to hand it back to you, Mr. Chair. We have a whiteboard here too, so that if anyone would like to scribe a little bit so that we've got all these things ready to see. And then the next thing we'll do after this is actually prioritize these specific interests so that, again, when we evaluate the options, these are at the forefront. Mr. Chairman?
Thank you. So members of the board, do you have thoughts, reflections on these priority items?
Mr. Chairman.
Regent Hughes.
Probably for the last 3 weeks, I've been studying the small paragraph in our Constitution talking about our duty and responsibility to Alaskans. And I came up with something similar to your slide, but only 3 words: the education of Alaskans, excellence in access, excellence in studies and education, and simplicity. And those are much, Mr. Chairman, like the slide. And of course, I hadn't got the slide yet. But I was spending a lot of time trying to figure out, first of all, we put the students first. And of course, the faculty educates the students. And that is where our monies in this type of arena need to be spent. The other thing that I guess from my perspective, and I spent a lot of time looking through the slides that were prepared. At this moment, the university doesn't know about our scholarship monies. And so not only is our house on fire, but gasoline is being poured on the fire. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Other regents' comments? Regent Purdue?
I'd like to add a thought, and I don't have it well schooled as to the wording, but it's the integration of teaching and research. I think that our university system has been growing since, well, I just think since 1953 when the Geophysical Institute was established, a world-class experience for students from all over the world to study the place that we live. And many, many other entities have followed. And I think a lot of people may not know that research is very focused on developing students and scholarship. So I would like to add a statement that supports that element of our mission.
Other comments, other readings?
Chair Davies, this is Dale Anderson.
Regent Anderson, go ahead, please.
I'm glad we're going down this path about prioritization and what is important to us to see in the future of University of Alaska. So I'm not necessarily asking to write these out on the whiteboard, but I wrote out 5 of them that I think are important to hear at least. So my board region priorities: student success through strong, effective student support services, emphasizing effective student support services. Number 2 is student access to a quality post-secondary education at a reasonable price. Number 3 is the impact of these drastic cuts minimized from a student's standpoint. Number 4 is precise mapping of the tracks for each of the student teach-outs to ensure that we're meeting our obligations to existing students. And then number 5 is the maximum dollars being spent on student experience rather than such a heavy administration or support staff that 3 universities require. And I think you can see in all 5 of my points and priorities, the student comes first. The student is our client. You know, I come from a entrepreneurial private sector job, and we have to recognize who we are working for. We are working for the students, and the students are the ones that should be the most important factor that we in going forward here. I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay, thank you. Other regents? Regent Garrett.
Chair Davies. Good morning, everybody. We articulate a lot how important the students are, and I think we agree that they really are. So I think we should ask them what they would have us decide. The students who are weighing in want to keep their 3 institutions, and we've heard it. The regents are receiving emails, and we hear it, students. What do the students say? Is there a student in the audience today that can stand up and say 1 or 3?
I think right now we're trying to have a discussion amongst the regents, so we will have in the future lots of opportunity for people to weigh in.
My additional thought is if the students are as important as we say they are, they should decide.
Thank you. Any other Regent comments? Regent Parker.
Excuse me while I clear my throat. I agree with what Regent Anderson had to say, as well as Regent Hughes. And I think it's, and again, Regent Purdue and students and research. And we have found over the history of the university that students and research do go hand in hand. But I think it's as much as practicable, making sure that we have a seamless process for students going forward. And while there is going to be a reduction, and as we blend together programs, reduce programs, we're going to have to make sure that we have the people that are going to be able to help the students, because based on what I've heard from students and from others, students right now are struggling and not sure what direction this university is going to go and where do they sit in the process. Their success, their student success is vitally important. And then my last would be that we don't burden students with additional cost. And that would be, there's been a lot of discussion about increasing tuition. That's going to burden the students with additional costs, and as they're struggling to figure out whether they have a scholarship or not, we've got to keep it as reasonable as possible so that they can continue to enroll within the University of Alaska, wherever they may be.
Thank you. Regent Neal, were you seeking the floor? No?
Regent Davies, this is Regent Beretta.
Okay, Regent Beretta, please go ahead.
Thank you. I agree with the priority of the students, and so my hope is that as we re-envision the university, that we make sure that we teach the history of the state and the people, because the culture of the group is more important than the individual is really, it's important through this time of crisis and the house is on fire notion, that if we work together, if we work towards a common goal of having a strong university, it's going to change. We all know that. But imparting in us that the history of our people in Alaska has been that we are strong and resilient, and we will have a strong university because that's our desire, that's our goal. And as human beings in this time of leadership, we have a responsibility to making sure the next generation has the same benefits that we did, to get an education, to understand, to have awareness. And so as we understand more about this structure and the one accreditation versus three and the cost, really it boils down to cost. And if we're still able to provide that high quality education, then we have to factor in cost with the structure. And so I am encouraging those young students and students in general, whether they're young or old, to envision a university that's strong. It's different. It's scary right now for people, and there's a lot of fear of change, but there's no doubt in my mind that we will survive and be stronger. It's just going to be challenging, and if we can be transparent through this process and involve people's voices, that we will be better for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Back here to Regent O'Neill.
So I have been, like my colleagues sitting around the table, reading and sifting through hundreds of emails, and I really appreciate all the communication. it broadens my thinking. And as I've been reading through the emails and having countless conversations, I continue to think about what leads us and our values. And you spoke about that this morning, Jim. And as I look at the UA's values, it's all about unity, accountability, leadership, excellence, accessibility, dedication, and stewardship. And I'm a firm believer that any time, in a time of crisis, in a time of opportunity, you always put your values in front of you, and that's how you make good decisions based on your priorities. So I think it's really important that we look at our mission and we come from decision making based on the values within the institution. I agree with my fellow regents that absolutely, number one, we have to be student-centered. And we have, in this crisis, potentially an opportunity to look at how we can make our systems more efficient and how students access our services in a way that works for them and lessen bureaucracy. And I do think that we also have to look at relevancy of what the work world needs today and into the future. And I've been using this term modernization, and I probably shouldn't use that wholesale term, but in my mind is really taking a look at the courses and the programs that we offer and relate that back to growing Alaskans to take the jobs within our state, and also to grow a generation of educated people who can live wherever they choose to in this world. And so that's where I've come down on this, is how do we make decisions through the frame of our values, ensuring that the students are at the core of that thought and decision-making process. And I think I heard somebody say in doing the right thing, coming from a place of great discernment rather than fear, because there's a lot of pain in this. There is a lot of pain. We're impacting people, we're impacting people's lives. And how do we make these tough decisions and hold all of that as we move forward, and keeping the student in the center of it?
Thank you very much. Before I go to the next region, I just want to recognize that Representative Adam Wool has joined us here, and appreciate his support. And I'm seeing somebody else. Oh, and Representative Joseph is also in the audience. Thank you very much.
I just want to mention that we do have space. There is space on the other side of this wall here for folks that are standing. They would have to access the meeting via a handheld device. But anyways, since there are some folks, I wanted to let them know there was overflow space.
Okay, thank you. All right, Regent Hargreaves.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to extend the record here that the students should, and they are, the first priority. And I continue to have a concern for that student that might be working toward a PhD. Just as an example, they have a year ahead of them to do a dissertation and to defend that dissertation. Is there a chance that a program, maybe there aren't too many people in it, and just 3 or 4 professors, is there a chance that a program like that could be cut this year? It could be cut. So we have a PhD student that's put all of the time and work into the effort, and they come up to the time to defend their dissertation, and they don't have faculty to work with. Is that a possibility for this coming year?
No, we have a teach-out responsibility, and that would extend to graduate students as well.
But what if you had to lay off the staff and close that department down?
We would make accommodations through our obligation under institutional accreditation to teach out that student. And we have that obligation for all of our students who are enrolled in our program.
And then secondly, Mr. Chairman, if a department were to be closed down for this year, does that come to this Board of Regents to make the decision?
Yes.
So it would be coming as a recommendation from the administration.
That's correct.
Mr. Chairman, sometimes these things do become very personal. And I know we've been dealing with lots of people who are saying, hey, that's my program. You can't close that. We just can't see that closed. And I've pretty much accepted everybody's comments, listened to people, trying to see where they're coming from. And then all of a sudden, there's a program being discussed which made me feel you can't close that down. The University of Alaska Museum. All of a sudden, I realized how partial I am to that program. And it put things into perspective with other people around this state that have been telling us you can't close this, you can't close that. All of a sudden, it became very personal to me. I've had a hand back over the decades of helping that university get its collections, and I've enjoyed that, and I hadn't realized how closely I came to feel a relationship with the University Museum, of all things. But that's where I'm coming from at this point, and it puts into perspective that everybody has something they want to save. Now, here's the problem with that. If it's the president's responsibility to recommend closure and we vote to close a program, we become the villains. And I think we just have to call on everyone to ask for their patience and ask their forgiveness if something has to be closed down. It's not people that's closing these down. It's a lack of revenue, and it's a lack of appropriation, perhaps. But, you know, there just isn't anyone who is to blame for this. It's a revenue problem. And the frail human beings that we are, we're working with those reductions in revenue. So the other question I have at this point, what is the status of community colleges? I keep thinking I don't understand the system right now. And I would ask a question that was asked decades ago. Could community colleges, would they best be served if they became their own system, separate and apart from the University of Alaska? There was a time when the PhD community on the Fairbanks campus took strong exception to the concept of community colleges. I remember quite well the term that they used to describe the Tanana Valley Community College in its formation stages. They referred to it as the Fender Bender College, and they didn't want to see that put in place. When that community college was put in place, it was done so with the Hutchinson Career Center, the borough, and the city school district. So the thought was that that would be a facility that wouldn't have its own facilities. It would be used at the Hutchinson Career Center. And a strong case was made that we wouldn't have to have any buildings for the Tanana Valley Community College. I think that has evolved a lot since then. I don't know the total status right now. But the question is it time to start looking in this structural reorganization and come up with a plan for breaking the community colleges off and perhaps reenacting the Community College Act 1962, which made community colleges a partnership, a cooperation between the university and the local school districts. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Regent Purdue.
I think Regent Hargraves raises a very interesting point. I would say, though, we have 2 hours to discuss these issues and a broad range of organizational issues. And I'm concerned that we're moving from values into, the business at hand. So I wondered if we could do that in a more comprehensive way, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I would ask the president if he wants to make a quick response to the question of this. What is the status?
The community campuses now are part of their regional universities. They are not separately accredited. Their accreditation and their programs are all part of the accreditation of the 3 separately accredited universities. There is a logic, I think, Regent Hargraves, and in many other states, particularly very large population states, there are separate community college systems. In those states, typically property taxes, local property taxes provide the financial support for those colleges. In Alaska, with just a couple, less than 5 exceptions, our communities really do not provide substantial support for their community campuses. That funding comes from the state. I think it's obviously your decision. My perspective would be that if we had a lot of resources, it might make sense. At this point, given the constrained resources and the reality of a separate system, which would involve yet more duplicative administration, I would have concerns about it at this point.
Okay, thank you. Other regents? Regent Benya.
Could we go back and show page 36 again, please? At the bottom there, we talk about a seamless student experience. You know, I was lucky enough to be appointed to this Board of Regents at perhaps the most crucial time in the history of the university. So I've been trying to play catch up and read everything that I could get my hands on, such as the Fisher report and the McTaggart report and any information that I could find. Along with the seamless student experience, it would seem to me that we should have something on there that speaks to student outcomes. Because as I read through this material, I don't feel like the student outcomes in the end are what they should be for a university such as the University of Alaska. And I don't really see anything there that, you know, what a seamless student experience actually means. Sounds great when it's written up there, but frankly, I'm not sure exactly what that refers to.
President Johnson.
You know, but student outcomes, I believe, should be included there. They need to, in my opinion, they need to be improved. And by making that statement, I'm not trying to cast any blame on any, you know, on the faculty, on the students, or whatever. But I think we need to speak somehow to student outcomes here, no matter which model is selected.
Thank you, Regent Benya. Slides 44, I think renumbered now, 44 and 45, provide a lot of information about that seamless student experience. You probably have
right, but I mean, to me, it would be here.
Going to the outcome, I agree with you, but I would also reflect on the many graduations that we've attended, and this year, for example, at the Fairbanks graduation, a young man walked across the stage. He graduated with my daughter from high school in 2003. He was very debt averse. He was paying his own way, and he took a course or two a year. So here we are in 2019, and he walked across the stage and got his baccalaureate degree. Now, from a standard measurement perspective, we failed, completely failed. but from the change, the outcome in that young person's life, I'd say that was a tremendous success on his terms. So I think, we have to balance, that access and wanting to support Alaskans in their own way, addressing their educational opportunities with, and I agree, some more efficiency in terms of the standard measures.
Well, no argument there,
Yeah.
but I just firmly believe that in general, student outcomes need to be improved, and it should be on there.
Any other comments? Regent O'Neill.
We've heard that the model that best contains, or from what I've heard and read, the model that best contains creativity and entrepreneurship is option 2, I believe, or is it option 1, 3 universities. And I think for a university system that is absolutely critical to teaching and learning. And so regardless of which structure we choose, I think that has to be embedded in both. And I believe that needs to be number 5, where we really focus on, for the places that the teaching is happening, that there's local creativity and entrepreneurship. And that's really connected back to those centers of excellence, because we do have centers of excellence that we do not want to let go of. So how do we continue to build upon our centers of excellence?
Thank you. Well, if there are other comments at this time, I guess I would like to offer my thought here. I share many of the comments that have been made, and I certainly support the notion that the primary among equals has to be the student experience, and I concur in trying to continue to assess student outcomes as part of that. I think that those are important ideas. Like Regent Hargraves, perhaps I want to admit to a certain, perhaps, personal bias in this comment, so I'll put that out there to begin with. But it also stems from personal experience, and that is that my view of a university, when a person says a university, I usually interpret that in the sort of the land-grant mission sense of a university that provides teaching, research, and public service. So those 3 items I continue to believe are the hallmarks of a university. With, of course, the essential piece of that is the student focus. But the things that we teach students, the knowledge that we teach students, are garnered through research. It's a fundamental thing that can't be forgotten. And then so I concur in the integration of teaching and research comment that Regent Perdue made. And I'd like to just add one further attribute of that I think is important to not lose sight of. And it actually goes back, it also relates to Regent Hargrave's comment about the museum. One of the attributes of research that is necessary is this longer view, that to study almost anything requires a long history of that study. And, if you're going to try to understand what's happened to the seals in Alaska, you need to have a record of what the seals in Alaska have been like over a long period of time. And the collections at the museum, for example, are some of those things that we have collected over time and continue to be accessed and used by researchers from all over the country and indeed over the world. In my personal experience, the effort with seismology requires the installation and maintenance of a network of seismic stations that are continued. You can't put in a seismic station after an earthquake occurs. If you want the data from that, you have to have the net in place when the event happens. And so there's this aspect of a long-term commitment to research, a core that. So I think that's one of the core values of the university. And whatever we do with restructuring, we should try to minimize the loss of that long-term investment that has been made in Alaska, which is important not only for Alaska, but for the United States, and in some cases, I believe, for the world. So I think that's a key thing. And also one of the other aspects of the university mission is public service, and through the community college effort and workforce development, we do a lot of that kind of work, but also through the formal commitment to cooperative extension. I believe that that's another key attribute that we need to the extent that we can, and if we have to cut back, we're going to have to cut back on some of these things. But I think the notion of the university providing direct support to the citizens of Alaska through that mechanism is an important one. So those are my only two additional comments that I would add to the mix. Any other comments? Regent Bain, I see you.
The only comment I want to make is I think it's time to get on to the main business at hand here. So.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I didn't want to cut people off, but I do want to move the conversation on. Regent Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move a motion, and prior to moving, I want to remind people, and I know everyone in the room who loves the university realizes that the university has been in Alaska for 100 years. And 100 years from now, the university will still be here. Mr. Chairman, I move the Board of Regents, pursuant to its constitutional duty to govern the University of Alaska in the best interest of the state and Alaskans, authorizes the President with interim oversight from a Regents subcommittee to be appointed. Mr. Chair, you have appointed the Regents subcommittee to implement the following steps towards increasing the share of resources devoted to academics and student services by developing a revised organizational structure for the University of Alaska. And there's 4 points. Number 1, reducing administrative costs immediately through consolidation and standardization of processes in the back office function areas, including but not limited to information technology, finance, university relations, and procurement. Number 2, preparing a strategic approach to combining duplicative academic colleges and schools, consolidating research institutes, and enhanced integration of community campuses for review and approval by the Board of Regents at its meeting on September 12 and 13 of 2019. Number 3, preparing to transition to a single institutional accreditation. That's a single institutional accreditation over the 2019-2020 academic year, and consulting through the above steps with student, faculty, staff, governance groups. I so move.
Is there a second?
This is Dale Anderson. I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? Regent Hargrave.
Mr. Chairman, I just have one question of President, if I may. Without this motion, is the content of this motion pretty much what you're directed to do? Is that what you're going to be doing? If the motion doesn't pass, is this the thing that's happening?
Regent Hargraves, it is going to be a challenge to move forward with immediate cost reduction steps without a motion like this, because we will not have the authority essentially to get going in that direction. And so it will be very challenging without a motion of this nature. Of course, the core elements of it need to come back to you for approval in September. You raised that issue a little earlier about academic program reductions or discontinuations requiring board approval. Yes, they do, and so that would all come back to you. But without this, our hands are largely tied in terms of our ability to timely make cost reductions.
Regent Tuber.
So thank you, Regent Hughes, for your motion, and to the regents who have described their perspective and their concerns and their priorities to. And I saved my comments until I heard what the motion or whatever motion might be made. And I appreciate the opportunity under discussion to make a couple of remarks. I would say I'm going to oppose your motion, Regent Hughes, because I think it's a bit too prescriptive for me at this time. And as such, I would suggest that regents contemplate, rather than simply the opportunity to move from a accreditation model where we're at with 3 universities to, as President Johnson has described, a simplified structure, contemplating maybe something in the middle ground in much the same way that so many successful states have, where you've got 2 university models, right? A competing university potential model that unlike, or potentially like University of Washington and Washington State, or University of Oregon and Oregon State, that the only option before us is not simply to maintain a 3 university or a 1 university model, but a multiple university model. My priority, and I think that I share common ground with other regions, has to do with access, has to do with the importance of education and the opportunity for education for Alaska's people, most particularly in my, as I see it, rural people. Access to education, because access to education serves as the single most significant intervention in prolonging life, in enhancing the quality of life of any intervention known. There are many interventions that occur in a human life that reduce life expectancy, smoking and drinking and all kinds of behaviors, but there is no single intervention that provides for the enhancement and the extension of life like education does. So I think, as has been said, that without data, we are all simply people with opinions. I think that it's going to be important for us to refer to the data to determine that we're maximizing access to education for Alaska's people before we make a determination as to whether or not the model we're going to pursue is a 3 university model versus a 1 university model, without potentially considering other models as well. It's not with disrespect that I speak against the motion, Mary. It's with the need for additional time to consider what the implications would be. And I respect that President Johnson has the charge of ensuring that we're equipped with sufficient information to make good decisions. But I don't believe that I'm at a point where I can support such a motion without first, with your indulgence, maybe the distribution of the wording of your motion, and also with additional time to consider what the potential implications are, understanding full well that President Johnson would then bring back to us a potential list of impacts and implications that we could then determine up or down whether or not this motion was suitably important or suitable for us as we vote for it or against it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to respond to that quickly?
If I might, quickly, thank you, Regent Huber. I really appreciate your emphasis, particularly on access. I haven't looked closely at the student count or the enrollments at the four institutions you mentioned. I suspect they're all, each one of them, as big or bigger than our entire system is. I'd also note that UW has 4 campuses, I believe, and 1 accreditation. And a lot of the data that I think you're talking about, and we've sort of talked about interests and haven't really gotten into a deep dive of the 2 options that are before you, is here. Slide 26, for example, actually compares on cost the 2 options that we've laid out. And there are also some more specific examples of how both the universities would, and if you have an interest, the chancellors are here and able to talk about how they would take these reductions within our current structure. And then there's also information here, and we could certainly happily discuss that, how we would take the reductions under a unified university structure. And we've provided some examples. So for example, the engineering, if we were to consolidate the schools of engineering, there's a substantial cost reduction, particularly on the administrative side, that would occur as a result of that. And that, I think, is a legitimate prototype for looking at other academic program consolidations across the system. Thank you.
Regent Parker, then Garrett, then Vanya.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like Regent Huber, I'd like to see a copy of this motion. There was a lot of information contained in there, and the motion that's in our packet is completely different than that. I'd also like to have, before we vote on it, discussion about the 2 options that we asked to get considered. I know that there's information in the packet. I'd like to hear from the chancellors on option 2. So I think that we need to, before we vote on this motion, actually have the discussion and go into these presentations regarding one university. In looking through the materials, I have a lot of questions. And before I could even vote on this motion, I would want to see those questions get answered and have the dialogue and be able to hear from the chancellors, be able to hear from the students.